welcome to Hamilton the Podcast. I'm Vinton Bayne.
And I'm Robbie Hurlocker.
So, Robbie, what do we know?
I know, just one or two things. Not very many things.
Not many things.
This is going to be a short episode. This is the episode on We Know.
We Know.
So at the end of the last song, the Adams administration, you have this trio of Republicans getting together. We have Aaron Burr, we have James Madison, and we have Thomas Jefferson, all rallied up, ready to show Hamilton the evidence that is mounting against him.
Yeah, exactly. What they think they know.
Yeah, so Jefferson says, as long as Hamilton can hold a pen, he's a threat. Even though he wrote this blazing attack on the Adams administration, taking John Adams out of the equation as a Federalist, he is still, even though he's not holding an office right now, he's still a threat to the Republican cause. So Jefferson says, we're going to do an investigation, and we're going to show him the results of that investigation to put him in a corner and try to take out Hamilton's ability to cause any type of trouble for the Republicans.
Right, so the last song ends, let's let him know what we know. And on the staging here, it goes directly into the next song. The music changes, and actually the music you start hearing is really reminiscent, if not almost exactly the same, as the music that's playing behind Mr. Reynolds and his letter that he writes to Hamilton during Say No to This. So you know exactly what this song is going to be about and where exactly it's going to take you. So you have Madison, Burr, and Jefferson, and they kind of turn and start to walk across the stage, where you find Hamilton sitting at his writing desk writing. And as each one of them approaches, he addresses them in more and more surprise. What are you guys doing here?
Yeah, it's almost concern growing in his voice. Mr. Vice President, it's one thing for one person to walk into his office. Mr. Madison, Senator Burr.
What is this?
Yeah, it's like an intervention. All of a sudden, someone's coming in, and then someone else comes in, and it's obviously serious.
And it could be just because this is a musical, but I like that Jefferson just jumped straight to it. No niceties, no what's up, how's it going? Just, we have the check stubs from separate accounts. It's oh, God, just come in guns a-blazing.
Right. Drop the bomb right at the beginning. He doesn't give any of the pleasantries. I'd rather skip the pleasantries. Let's go. He just goes straight into this.
Yeah, and then Madison comes in, almost $1,000 paid in different amounts, and Burr just finishes that up to a Mr. James Reynolds way back in 1791.
Yeah, the way that they just finish each other's sentences there, where it just presents this unified attack against Hamilton. They're all coming in at the same page, ready to land blast him with their attack. And I like that they are all unified against him. And then Hamilton, in his response, just is very confident. He's caught off guard when they first enter the room. Now he knows what he's going to say. And he says, is that what you have? Are you done? Are you ready to get, let the grown-ups do their thing now?
And so, of course, if you listen to our previous episode, Say No to This, that you know about the actual affair here, and you know that Hamilton actually paid $1,000 initially, and then he had to pay these $30, $40 payments each time he would see her. So the amount, they kind of combine that here. Of course, you don't want to go into too much detail in the musical. Yeah,
we're not going to actually show all the different check stubs from his account at the Bank of New York and then his account at the Bank of the United States there. And because Hamilton was under investigation by the committee and the Congress, he had to turn over not just the Treasury Department funds, but also his own personal accounts there.
Yeah.
So he had to turn in his two accounts and the different bank account information that was involved so that they could go through every single check stub that he had acquired over a period of time and make sure that he hadn't been funneling money into his own account or funneling money into his friend and co-conspirator James Reynolds and fellow speculator. Yeah. They wanted to make sure that he was not an immigrant embezzling government funds. So they were going through his account with a fine-tooth comb.
So here they lay the evidence against him. They haven't quite made the accusation, but they lay the evidence against him. And you have Hamilton just kind of dismissing it. Is that what you have? Are you done? Which I really like that attitude, that Hamiltonian attitude.
Yeah, it's definitely good. And I like the way they just keep going through. They're not put off by this because they still feel like they have the upper hand. They still feel like you may show your characteristic cockiness, your headstrong confidence here, but Madison, Jefferson, and Burr are still going to keep laying out their argument. They say, you are uniquely situated by the virtue of your position, says Madison.
And then Jefferson, though virtue is not a word I'd apply to this situation, which I love that, the way he flips the situated situation and the virtue, Madison's saying virtue, because of this happened. And Jefferson's turning around saying, yeah, virtue as in, goodness. That's not really what I would use for this situation.
Yeah.
You're no angel here, Hamilton.
And while these characters had been completing each other's sentences at first, this is almost a moment where Jefferson interrupts Madison's sentence. Like, Madison's line says, "You are uniquely situated by the virtue of your position to seek financial gain to stray from your sacred mission." And Jefferson interjects with that, "Virtue is not a word I'd apply to this situation," and then he goes on eventually. But it's almost like he can't wait until they actually level the accusation. He's so excited to get that jab in there.
Yeah,
like,
he's got to grab that word to attack Hamilton's character real quick.
Oh, yeah.
So Madison, "to seek financial gain, to stray from your sacred mission." And then Jefferson lays out what they're going to accuse him here. And the evidence suggests that you've engaged in speculation.
And Burr kind of summarizes that in his playful, like, jabbing at him tone, where he's like, "An immigrant embezzling our government funds." I can almost see the headlines. Your career is done.
Yeah, I love the way that they start doing that, like, playful singing of it. They're so excited here.
Yeah, they're celebrating here.
And you see this throughout the song as this act 2 continues, this anti-immigrant rhetoric. They keep bringing this up against him. I think it's really interesting the wording used there by Burr. He suggests that Hamilton is really not part of America. He's like an immigrant who's embezzling our funds. This is our money, not your money. You're an immigrant. You don't belong here. We don't want you here. It's almost got the idea that you see in politics today of immigrants coming over and taking things from us. And they're taking our jobs and our money. And it's like, you are taking things from us. We are America. You're an immigrant.
Yeah, instead of acknowledging that we are all America. We are a country of immigrants. Right. We are a country built on this melting pot idea that we all are endowed by our creator with inalienable rights. And once you get here and once you come into this situation, you get to become an American citizen, much like Alexander Hamilton had. He had fought and bled for this country, for crying out loud. But here they kind of continue their jest, their celebratory tone as Burr keeps going. He says, "I hope you save some money for your daughters and sons. You best go and run back where you come from." Where they're saying, "Hey, you better have made plans otherwise than just the government, because you are out now. You will not be able to get out of this thing under which we have buried you. Your reputation is gone."
Right. And quick note on that line, "You best go and run back where you come from." That might sound familiar to you, at least in the tone of it. And that's because it's based off of Lauryn Hill's Lost Ones. And it used to be a direct quote from her song, saying, "You might win some, but you just lost one." And Miranda said that the reason why they ended up having to change it is because it was basically impossible for them to get the rights to use it. But they kept the same tone there for it. And also, it's funny to me, I was listening to that song, and the first 2 lines really seem to talk to this song. The first 2 lines of that song are, "It's funny how money changes situation. Miscommunication leads to complication."
I like that. That's very interesting.
Which, that song's awesome. I listened to it like 4 or 5 times today just because it made me want to listen to it.
That's good. It makes me think about how when you're a creator and you're trying to pay respect to these things that have influenced you for so long, it is hard to get those rights, to make sure you're doing right by creators, that you're not totally just stealing their intellectual property rights, but you want to respect it, so you want to work it into your work. Just one other area that people who are doing something on this level have to really start thinking about. They have to think about, how do we balance that? And it's very, very difficult.
Exactly. So Hamilton is going to laugh at them here. "Ha! You don't even know what you're asking me to confess." That Hamiltonian attitude again. He's got that cockiness. He just realized that, "Oh, I thought you actually had something against me. You don't even know what you're talking about." Which is funny. The first time that the word "know" is used here in the song "We Know" is Hamilton basically going, "Oh, you guys don't know anything."
Oh, that's good.
And actually, to skip ahead a little bit, we're going to touch on this later, but a quote from the Reynolds pamphlet that I think really touches on the way Hamilton's responding here. He says in that, "It's a little remarkable that an avaricious," basically greedy, "speculating Secretary of the Treasury should have been so straitened for money as to be obliged to satisfy an engagement of this sort by 2 different payments," basically touching on that he couldn't afford to pay that $1,000 earlier in one whole payment because he didn't have enough money. But they're accusing him here of basically stealing money from the government.
Yeah, basically, if Hamilton was embezzling government funds, his wife wouldn't have had to sell her house when he died. They didn't have the money. They had not benefited from this. And we talk about how Hamilton married into status, married into a wealthy family. When he got married, he didn't really accept financial aid from his father-in-law. He didn't want to basically piggyback on someone else's ambitious rise to power. He valued power more than money. And if he really was in this for the money, he wouldn't have been so poor that he needed to go back and become a lawyer doing regular law practice again.
Yeah, exactly.
he made a lot more money as a lawyer than as a Treasury Secretary.
And then all three of them in unison, confess. And so I like that they're like, I don't know what you're talking about, but we need you to go ahead and admit what you did here.
Right. It's like they're pleading with him. He says, you don't even know what you're asking me to confess. And they're like, go ahead, just confess it. We know you did something wrong. We know that you did this.
Yeah,
the
you
evidence
can't snake your way out of this one, Hamilton.
Yeah, the evidence is pointing towards it. So they plead for that. Hamilton just says, you don't really have a full case against me. I don't have to tell you anything at all. But then an idea comes to his mind.
Right. I like that because it seems like he does like stop unless, then like almost bated breath. Unless.
Yeah. I like that a lot.
Wait, what? Just kind of go with them there. And actually another funny moment. We already brought up one reference to My Brother and Me, the podcast where Lin-Manuel Miranda listens to, and he put a reference in there. But actually this is another one. And it surprised me when I found this out, but he tweeted about it and said this unless here. He specifically used that wording because the McElroy brothers often use unless to add a twist to the goofs that they do. And so he was like, oh, I put this near so I could just have even more My Brother and Me references in my musical.
That's awesome.
Again, I think it's really awesome that he's referencing, this big podcast in his famous musical.
That's really good. I like how lyrically this does give a turn of the control where they walk into the room. Hamilton is a little bit out of control. They are the ones with the put together arguments. Here, Hamilton is the one with the put together arguments and the sentences that make sense. And they're kind of just echoing his word at the end. They're like, He says confess. They're like, confess. And he says unless. And they're like, unless. They want him to basically bury himself by the next words he says. And instead, he says, if I can prove that I never actually broke the law, then do you promise not to tell another soul what you saw? It's like he's realizing that this may be his way out. If he can prove that he did not actually do anything illegal, then can he basically drop all these accusations and never have to deal with them again?
Right. And so this next line kind of weirded me out. I don't know if you have an opinion on this, Robbie, but the way he says this could be a callback to things. Obviously, it's a callback to where he couldn't be in that room where it happened, but he almost seems to be saying, like, excited here. He seems to be saying this with a little bit of joy, like, I'm in the room where it happens finally. And it's interesting here that usually when you have these callbacks and these things, it's done musically, but not in conversation. Here it's in conversation. Burr says, no one else was in the room where it happened. And Hamilton's like, is that a yes? Why are you saying that?
Yeah, I do think that this is a celebratory callback of sorts, where Aaron Burr has been desiring to be in the room where it happened ever since Hamilton thwarted his plans back when Madison and Jefferson and Hamilton made that original compromise to get the capital to move to the Potomac. And like that was one of the deals that was made behind the scenes, where some deal was struck that Burr didn't get to influence in any way whatsoever. Here is another deal being struck saying, hey, drop these accusations against me if I give you one other little thing, if I explain this to you. And so it's a callback to where there's a moment where there's a room and something important is happening. Some decision is happening behind the scenes. And Burr is able to say now, I'm a part of this.
Yeah.
I'm a part of that.
I like to imagine here that Burr meant to say that to himself and Hamilton heard it. He was just like, no one knows. Like he just has this moment where the spotlight's only on him and he just steps out from everybody else and no one else was in the room where it happens. And Hamilton's like, is that a yes? He's like, oh, you heard that? I'm sorry.
Did I say that out loud? I really like that interpretation. That's the best one I've heard so far. I like that. And then with a little bit of uncertainty in their voice, you hear Jefferson, Madison, and Burr basically agreeing to that term, saying, yes? Because
they don't know where he's going with this. They're like, I guess so. What are you talking about?
Right. I almost read a lot of insincerity in their yes.
Yeah.
That is like,
I can totally see that.
It to me seems like, well, you're telling me that all I have to do to get the information is say yes? That's all I have to do.
I'll easily say yes to that.
Yeah, I'll say
fingers behind my back crossed.
Right. That's how politics works. Like later on, whenever Hamilton brings up what he brings up in a second, Burr basically never really promises to keep it silent. He says, look, we both know what we know, and rumors only grow. So we'll get to that in a second. Right. What is it that Hamilton brings out of his jacket pocket and passes over to the trio that's against him?
The letter from Mr. Reynolds himself about the affair. And Burr starts reading it, and verbatim, just the way we had it, and say no to this.
Yes.
Dear sir. And he goes all the way down to, you see, it was my wife who you decided to, and Jefferson pops in, what?
Yes.
So you get that replacement of the for the last one.
Right. I almost imagine like this correspondence happening on stage where Burr has been casually reading the letter. Jefferson's looking over his shoulder. Madison's looking over his shoulder. And when you get to that point, Jefferson like grabs the paper. He's like, what? Like puts his face like right into it. Like, what is happening here? There's definitely a lot of surprise, whatever the staging might be in that moment. He is definitely incredulous. Like, this isn't what I expected. This may be even worse or may even be even better. I don't know. I'm still trying to cope with what did I just learn?
Yeah, and I noticed when I was doing my notes for this episode today that Jefferson actually has this surprised response often in this musical. He's already had it once or twice now, and he's going to have it a couple more times in songs coming up where he just stops and is like, what? Or says something like, God, what?
Yeah, say what?
Yeah. So I don't know if that was purposely done to have Jefferson have that character of always like caught off guard and surprised, but I like that comes up over and over.
Yeah, it's either that or Daveed Diggs is just so good at delivering that hip hop, like, say what reference where he just is super incredulous. And that's a really good, just lyrical hip hop moment.
And so Hamilton's going to come back in here and he's going to basically be on the attack. He's got his wording down perfectly. And we've mentioned that a couple of times that when Hamilton feels like he needs to be attacking, he is great with his words. You know, if he's got a pen, he's a threat. And Lin-Manuel Miranda actually said in an interview recently that when Hamilton's mad, it's like I'm Super Eminem. I'm going to get to destroy you with my mind.
Oh, yeah. That's good.
So he really likes those parts when he gets to do that.
Yeah, and in this stanza, he's answering the question of, what did we just read? What is happening here? But I have to ask the question, who is he attacking here? Is he attacking them, or is he actually attacking himself?
That's true.
He's his own worst enemy here. It's like he's got that confident, like, you came into this room to destroy me? Well, I'm going to get the better of you. I'm going to go one up on top of this, and I'm going to destroy me.
Yeah.
Wait, what?
Oops.
Yeah, like, he's actively taking out the ground from their argument where they're saying that you have engaged in speculation, you've unlawfully and unethically behaved while you're the Treasury Secretary. And so he is attacking that position, that attack. He's saying, no, I never did anything illegal. I just did something immoral in my own marriage, not in my public office.
Right. So earlier when they were telling him to confess, they want him to confess an illegal activity to be imprisoned over. Instead, he's going to confess a sin. And I love the rhymes here. He does courted me, escorted me, extorted me, sorted free, quarterly, mortally, orderly. I love that. It just shows Lin-Manuel Miranda's genius and the way that he views Hamilton and his writing genius.
Yeah, my favorite types of rhymes in hip-hop are when you have that extended, long rhyme of three things all back to back, when you just keep going with the flow. Like, Big Pun did that better than anyone, I think. Eminem does that all the time. You have a lot of Tupac's rhymes that kind of get close to that at times, and there are really good lyrics in this musical that are just on par with some of the best.
Yeah, and there's a reason with the passion going through those rhymes here that Lin-Manuel Miranda said that this is his favorite verse to perform in the show.
And I like the way he uses the word check at least three separate ways in this stanza where he says, as you can see, I kept a record of every check in my checkered history. Check it again against your list and see consistency. That in itself is a nice little usage of those homonyms, or the actual word check used as his actual checks that he was writing from his bank account, his checkered history that has a various type of notorious past, and then check it again against your list, where look it over again, checking it twice.
And it's funny to me that in a musical where there's so many references to chess that he skipped making a checkmate reference here.
Yes, that would have been another level on top of this. I wonder why, because he's obviously thought of it, and he's brilliant. He's thought of ways to fit check in. He maybe just wanted to cut the lines for the sake of...
Well, the very fact that both of us had that thought means that he was probably just trying to switch it up and be like, oh, this is what they expect me to do. I'm not going to do it.
That's true. He's also in the middle of his argument a little bit, so he's not going to say the final checkmate is in place all of a sudden.
I do like the way this line ends, though, with this list and see consistency. I love the way that that's performed, and just the writing of those words together that rhymes so quick right there at the end of the line.
Yeah, and then you have a loose connection to what he kind of did with check, checkered, and check it again, where he says, I never spent a cent that wasn't mine. You sent the dogs after my scent. That's fine. Where you have scent. It sounds the same in both ways. A scent of money or the scent of a dog.
Scent, scent, and scent. And I like the way that line ends. He's at the apex of his anger here, and he just says, you sent the dogs after my scent? That's fine. And he just like had that pause before he says fine, and that passionate delivery.
Yeah, I almost like see him like gripping his fist like, that's fine.
Yeah, his aggression there.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
He's angry. He's got a lot of people attacking him. He's busy because as Treasury Secretary, he has a lot of things on his plate. He has to deal with people constantly going to him saying, hey, pay me for the services I provided as a soldier in the Revolutionary War. Write this patent for me to make sure I'm covered for my expenses. And so he has lots of day-to-day activity that keeps him busy all the time. And on top of that, he's being attacked in every Republican paper. He's being attacked in the streets. He's being attacked by the Congress who's investigating him, going through all of these things. And he's got to be worn out, right? He's got to be He's got to be in need of a break. You've never seen a bastard orphan more in need of a break than this guy who's taking everything against him. There are a couple letters from Hamilton to Angelica Church from this point in history where he's kind of talking about how much he really does kind of want to get out of his office because he's so frustrated with it. Remember that Hamilton actually resigned during the Washington administration. He didn't stick around through the Adams administration historically. So at the end of the Washington administration, where he was still a part of it, he had been writing to Angelica, and he says, like, this, remember, this investigation is going on from the Congress, and he says, "But how oddly are all things arranged in this sublunary scene. I am just where I do not wish to be. I know that I could be much happier, but circumstances enchain me." In another letter, he said, "Believe me, I am heartily tired of my situation, and I wait only the opportunity of quitting it with honor and without decisive prejudice to the public affairs." So he says that I'm sticking around because I want to make sure I leave with honor. I want to make sure that my pride is intact. There's no prejudice against me where people are able to attack me and they think, oh, Hamilton's resigning? Well, that's because the investigation is obviously really close to uncovering something big. He's being forced out. Like, he's not really retiring. He's actually being fired, but they're trying to make it nice. So he didn't want to give him anything like that to talk about. He said, I'm going to stick around. I'm going to make sure this investigation goes well so that I can go out with pride. And one of the things we did mention historically is that once this investigation, because of term limits and everything, actually closed down in the Congress, Hamilton eventually asked for it to be reopened. They asked, Hamilton said, like, I know that publicly I am above reproach, so reopen that investigation, Congress. Go ahead, reform your committee. This is even after, like, up to 4.5 years of Republican control in the Congress, when the Republicans had actually taken charge under the Washington administration of the Congress there. And so it's a mostly Republican-dominated committee going against the Treasury Department, and Hamilton feels confident enough that he says, hey, I want to go out with pride, so I want you to uncover every single thing you can about my Treasury Department. I'm going to make it easy for you to go into every account, for you to check every single check in my checkered history, and I want to make sure that you know at the end of this investigation that I'm above reproach and you got nothing on this guy.
Right. So he goes on to say, yes, I have reasons for shame, because he is confessing to something that he is ashamed of. And the Reynolds affair is one of the few places where Hamilton explicitly admits that he's wrong about something. And it was interesting to me. Obviously, we'll get to this a little bit later, but the Reynolds pamphlet, people often question, like, why would he do that? Why would he put that out? And there's actually a quote in it that kind of explained it to me, where he sees that he has this history of tomcat behavior, as we know from previous episodes. We've discussed that. That behavior is well known and criticized in political circles even before the Reynolds pamphlet. And in the Reynolds pamphlet, he wrote, "But it is observed that the dread of the disclosure of an amorous connection was not a sufficient cause for my humility, and that I had nothing to lose as to my reputation for chastity, concerning which the world had fixed a previous opinion. I shall not enter into the question what was the previous opinion entertained of me in this particular, nor how well founded, for it was indeed such as it is represented to have been."
Yes, so we are going to talk in just a second about how historically some of those rumors got started and how some people in the right types of Republican circles had learned about the affair and kind of started hinting at it and started those rumor mills turning. And so we're going to talk about that history in just a second, but let's finish up these lines a little bit here. So he says, "I've not committed treason and sullied my good name."
That's interesting to me, because treason can be, against your nation. Technically, another definition of it can be to a person, and he did kind of commit treason to his wife.
Yeah, it's definitely like a treasonous type of thing. He's not being loyal to her, for sure.
Yeah. And it's also interesting, if you look at it, that he's looking at Burr when he says this, and he might be saying, and I also didn't commit treason unlike some people will be accused of later, Burr.
Oh, right, yeah, when he's accused of basically trying to raise an army and attack Washington, D.C. and take over the Jefferson administration. And we'll get into that when we get into the What Comes Next episodes after this musical is done. Because, dude, Aaron Burr's life isn't over yet.
No.
And it is fascinating. After the time of this musical, you get to see what he does to go on, kind of become a little bit of that scoundrel that people talk about him being. And depending on who you listen to, you get to see a period of time when he takes over an army, tries to raise an army and become the emperor of Mexico and like do all these things, like attacking Spanish-owned territory, French-owned. It's interesting, and I can't wait to get into that period where he is. Yeah, stay tuned for when we actually get to uncover when Burr was accused of treason. That's really neat. So here he says that I, Hamilton, have not done anything to provoke legal actions. And then, like a lawyer, he finishes his statement. And he says, "Are my answers to your satisfaction?" Another moment of satisfaction being important in this musical.
Yeah. Which, again, as a lawyer here, he would know that back then adultery was technically illegal. But at that time, men were rarely, if ever, charged with adultery. So he would know that his fornication wouldn't provoke legal action, at least.
Right, and given the history of Hamilton's own mother, Hamilton would have been intimately connected with a lot of the laws in the British colonies that basically attacked women for adultery and not the men. Let the men get off scot-free. And it was a really bad double standard that's really been a part of a lot of human history, to be honest. And even today in social circles, we often look more at the women than the men and for the ones that are blaming there. And we could talk all day on a different podcast about the double standard of what it means for a man to be a stud and a woman to be looked down on for those reputations. But here we see that Hamilton knows none of my actions would actually give you a legal case against me. No one would actually listen to you if you tried to try this in front of a trial, in front of a jury.
Exactly. And then Jefferson comes in with his surprise again. My God.
And I like that Madison here is the one who's been a little calmer. He's not really reacted incredibly vocally or just with a lot of presence to the things that have been said, the attacks that have been made. And he kind of has that voice of reason. And he says, "Gentlemen, let's go. Our work is done here. Like, this is not a thing we need to keep pressing anymore. It's done. It's a little bit embarrassing for us to be here now. Let's slip out because this is now an uncomfortable, intimate, personal situation." And
so Hamilton's wanting to check and make sure. And Jefferson and Madison at the same time, the people won't know what we know, which is a callback to that Notorious B.I.G. reference from Cabinet Battle number 2. And if you don't know, now you know.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And just narratively, that makes the whole arc of this song make a lot of sense. This particular beat starts out with Jefferson saying, "Hey, let's let him know what we know." And then they go in to let Hamilton know what they know. And now Jefferson and Madison are getting ready to leave, having learned something new. And he says, "The people won't know what we know. We were going to go to the press about this. We were going to basically try to push you out of office. If we couldn't just blackmail you out of stepping down yourself, we were going to make this a public thing. But now we're going to promise that the people won't know what we know." But who did not promise that?
Yeah, someone's voice is absent there, and it is Burr, who Hamilton calls out immediately. "Burr, how do I know you won't use this against me the next time we go toe-to-toe?" And Burr says, "Alexander, rumors only grow, and we both know what we know." An interesting point here, we've brought up before the significance of the way that these two address each other, and I think it's interesting. There's no sir here, he's just Burr, which you could say there's that, look into that deeper. I think it's just because he's leaving the room. He's trying to catch his attention. But Burr, on the other hand, does not say Hamilton. He says Alexander. He has lost title. He has lost the last name. He's speaking down to him here, almost like you talk to a child. Alexander. There's a loss of respect there.
That's really interesting. I've never actually thought of it from that angle before, as far as using his first name there. That's really compelling.
Yeah, the power dynamic here has shifted. And Burr has something on Hamilton.
All because he got to be in the room where this happened.
And Burr's not giving that clear answer. Like we mentioned earlier, he's not giving him a clear answer, whether he's going to say something or not.
Yeah, he's got that shadowy attitude there where he's talking less and smiling more, not letting him know what he is against or what he's for. Like, he's here not telling him what his political strategy is. He's not going to tell him that I'm going to use this in a battle against you. And we've talked before on this podcast about how in the correspondence between Hamilton and Burr and their relationship before the famous duel, most of their attacks between each other, Burr keeps those political.
Yeah.
He doesn't go personal on a lot of those. He kind of has those boundaries. He says, like, we can keep the relationship friendly even though we don't have political agreement all the time. And talking politics doesn't mean we have to stop being friends. So that's Burr's position on it. Hamilton has that much more no-holds-barred approach to politics, where he goes after Burr, and he's the one who attacks Burr's character historically. He's the one in the Battle of 1800, when the election comes down, he starts passing out to the other Federalists all of these really bad attacks on Burr's character, on his personal life, and on his politics, because he's the one who actually attacks Burr's character. So obviously he's going to be a little nervous that now Burr has more ammunition. But if we look at the historical account and the historical timeline of things, we can see that Aaron Burr was, as we've discussed before, the lawyer for Mariah Reynolds.
Exactly.
In the James Reynolds divorce case. So that was happening, and Mariah gets married the very day the divorce is finalized. Very interesting little timeline there. But Aaron Burr was privy to a lot of personal details about Mariah Reynolds' life and about her marriage and a lot of things there, and he never went to the press about Hamilton's affair historically.
Yeah, talking about the history here, let's go ahead and dive into what actually happened, what this story actually looked like in history. Because as we know, the musical combines a lot of things and pushes a lot of things together in the timelines so you can get a more concise view of it so you don't have to dive into all the details.
Right.
That's what we're here for. Let's dive into some of those details.
Yeah, so historically, there was never a meeting with Burr, Jefferson, and Madison confronting Hamilton. This meeting did not take place as it's conveyed in the musical, but another meeting did take place that's very similar.
Right. In November 1792, more than a year after Hamilton's affair with Mariah started, her husband James was arrested on charges of forgery and illegal speculation. He then tried to say that Hamilton was involved in his speculation.
Right.
And so, while it wasn't Jefferson, Madison, and Burr, James Monroe, Frederick Muhlenberg, and Abraham Venable.
Yeah, so House Speaker Muhlenberg was in charge of the House, obviously. He brought along a Virginian Representative Venable, and you have Senator James Monroe, eventually President James Monroe, but we don't know that historically yet.
Right. They visited Reynolds in prison and had heard this rumor, so they would go and confront Hamilton about it.
Yeah, they kind of brought that accusation to Hamilton in his office at first, which is very similar to the staging of this scene where we saw that this trio went in and confronted Hamilton at his desk. This trio, historically, of Monroe, Muhlenberg, and Venable went into Hamilton's office and said, hey, we want to be forthright about this. We're going to show these papers that we have from James Reynolds. We're going to show those papers to George Washington, but we really feel honor-bound to show these to you first so you can give an account. And Hamilton at that point says, listen, if you show up at my house tonight, I have some documentation that I want to show you. If I can prove that I never broke the law, do you promise not to tell another soul what you saw? Basically, is what he says. He says, like, listen, I don't have the paperwork with me right now, but if you meet me at my house tonight, I can talk you through what actually happened here. I can explain every one of those James Reynolds papers and show you why they are actually valid. The trio kind of went in historically and thought that Hamilton would deny everything. They expected him to say these papers are a forgery by a guy who's desperate and is trying to climb out of his situation, but he says, I acknowledge those are true. Those are real documents. Let me explain to you tonight what actually was happening.
Right, and let me go straight to Chernow and what he says about this, because I think he does it well. He says, another man might have been brief or elliptical. Instead, as if in need of some cathartic cleansing, Hamilton briefed them in agonizing detail about how the husband had acted as a bawd, or a pimp, for the wife, how the blackmail payments had been made, the loathing the couple had aroused in him, and his final wish to be rid of them. When the three legislators realized that the scandal involved marital infidelity, not governmental corruption, at least one of them, quote, delicately urged me to discontinue it as unnecessary, Hamilton recalled. Quote, I insisted upon going through the whole and did so.
So as Congress has been doing this whole investigation against Hamilton, and these three legislators have come against Hamilton with these accusations, there's actually a fourth person. Oliver Wolcott Jr. was invited to the evening meeting. He wasn't there when the legislators officially approached Hamilton to begin with. And I don't remember exactly whether Oliver Wolcott Jr. did show up at that meeting in the evening or not. He was invited, but those three definitely do show up, Muhlenberg, Monroe, and Venable, and they go through every little detail, the gruesome details that Hamilton shows them in the Mariah Reynolds affair, where he goes through and shows every little love letter she had sent to him, everything that had been brought up, and they go through and they show Hamilton the documentations that they had seen from James Reynolds that kind of hinted at some improper things. And it was a fascinating little interaction that had to have been uncomfortable. But they do agree that this is about marital infidelity. This is about an improper connection between Alexander Hamilton and Maria Reynolds, and then Mr. Reynolds coming in and making some money off of it. And they understand, oh, we found these leads. We thought they were pointing one direction. They actually are pointing another direction, and they are willing to drop the case. They're willing to drop the accusations.
Very similar to what happens in our musical here. The three men agree to keep the details of Hamilton's affair secret. However, Monroe did send some copies of those letters to his close friend Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah, so there's some back and forth a lot in this period of time when you're reading the documentations about this as to whether Monroe officially was just showing his own copies of the papers to people at dinner parties, or whether he actually had multiple copies drafted. Historically, Hamilton actually, a couple days after the meeting, sends off to those three men, and he says, hey, will you send me some copies of the documents that you received from James Reynolds so that I can have for my files what happened here? And since he allowed them to make the copies for him, Monroe entrusted the task to John Beckley, the clerk of the House of Representatives, to actually make the copies of his documents for him. And so you bring in this other Republican Jeffersonian loyalist who is involved now in copying the documents, transposing them by hand so that he can have a copy of them. And you now have a moment where there are more people being brought in.
Yeah, these three swore to secrecy, but the person that made the copies didn't. And 5 years later, you're going to have Jefferson starting some rumors about those letters, basically. And this journalist, James Thompson Callender, is going to publish pamphlets about the affair and the original speculation accusations that include copies of those documents that Hamilton had given Monroe in 1792.
I like how Ron Chernow describes the Scottish-born James Thompson Callender as an ugly, misshapen little man who made a career out of spewing venom. I feel like Ron Chernow kind of directly violates his own journalistic integrity at that moment.
He's got it out for that guy.
He doesn't like him at all. But he's actually echoing the comments of the day that were leveled against him. Later on, in later years, Jefferson will actually condemn Callender himself as a poor creature, hypochondriac, a drunken, penniless, and unprincipled person. But at this point in time, when Callender has actually supported taking down Hamilton, Jefferson actually is so pleased with Callender's handiwork that he stopped by Callender's lodgings and actually congratulated him and bought some copies of a pamphlet and a book that he had been publishing on his own. So Jefferson's all for Callender as long as he's attacking Hamilton, but he's not for Callender later on once he's got this reputation of being an untrustworthy, venomous person.
So in other words, James Thompson Callender might have been the inspiration for Rita Skeeter from Harry Potter is what you might be trying to say there.
Right. She wasn't an ugly, misshapen little man, but she definitely had that venomous, I'm just going to print lies.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter what I'm actually saying as to whether it's true or not, but I'm going to print just enough truth to make the lies I'm telling look that much more credible.
So when this happens, Hamilton is going to confront Monroe. And Monroe's going to deny involvement and be so upset by Hamilton's accusations, he's going to challenge Hamilton to a duel. And surprisingly enough, you have Aaron Burr here stepping in, kind of bringing the peace a little bit and at least averting a duel.
Yeah, that's fascinating that there was going to be a duel with Hamilton and Aaron Burr's the one to stop it.
Exactly.
Man, historically looking backwards on that gives that moment so much meaning. But that feud between Hamilton and Monroe is a very deep-seated one that was huge because Hamilton was always convinced that Monroe must have been the one. He was entrusted with the documents to keep these for safekeeping. Hamilton was convinced it was his actions that led to those pamphlets being printed with pieces of the letters and pieces of the Reynolds affair documentation going into the papers again, so that even though the senators who had received those papers to begin with were firmly convinced that Hamilton was innocent of the attacks leveled against him, Callender kept putting forward, hey, one, yes, he was in an affair, but two, he's reprinting all of those old accusations that he was cleared for. He was actually let off the hook after investigations through the Congress went through all of those things. And historically, there's this really interesting moment where Eliza Hamilton, when she's in her 70s, is visiting some family in D.C., and President James Monroe comes up to the house and is ready to visit her. I think it's just after his presidency, but he's still has the title now, Mr. President James Monroe. He comes in, he delivers his card to her maid, basically goes back there and says, "Hey, do you want to talk to James Monroe?" And she gets angry. She cannot believe that James Monroe, who basically played this huge role in diminishing her husband's legacy, has the audacity to show his face in front of her husband's widow. And so she comes in, she receives him, but she does, like, James Monroe bows down to her. She sits down. She doesn't offer him a chair. She doesn't offer him tea and cake or anything nice. She's just like, say your piece.
Yeah,
and
what do you want?
What do you want, Monroe? Like, it's ridiculous. And it's kind of awesome, her attitude in that. Exactly. I love that. And Monroe basically kind of offers this non-apology where he says, "Hey, like, a lot of time has passed. There's no hard feelings between us. I'm ready to bury the hatchet if you are. Everybody makes mistakes, right?" And so he's like, "Hey, let's just own up that we both have made mistakes and we both are engaged in this problem." And she looks at him like, "Are you kidding me? You did this. I'm not going to take any blame for that." Right. And here's a response. "Mr. Monroe, if you have come to tell me that you repent, that you are sorry, very sorry, for the misrepresentations and the slanders and the stories you circulated against my dear husband, if you have come to say this, I understand it. But otherwise, no lapse of time, no nearness to the grave makes any difference." And Monroe, basically, since he's not willing to apologize, grabs his hat, nods to her, and leaves. And she gets that ultimate mic drop. I love it.
Get it, Eliza.
Yes.
Yeah, it's almost like he shows up and he's basically saying, "Hey, we all do things. You and I both, everyone was at fault here. Let's just forget this." Nope, you're at fault. I love that she sticks up for Hamilton like that.
Yes, that's great. A lot of people look at, like, just a part of her quote and say, well, man, Eliza was bitter in her old age. But no, she was so passionately devoted to her husband's legacy and to her family and to fighting for what Hamilton believed in, that she would not just accept that half-hearted answer, because she knew her husband never would have. She knew that she was going to stand up for what she believed in and the man that she believed in, and the fact that his character was so harmed by the behavior of James Monroe in this. They were firmly convinced that it was all on his shoulders. They were so firmly hurt by that she wasn't just going to let him get off without taking responsibility and making that apology.
Right. Some people might say that she's intense or she's insane. We would say she's great, though.
She's fantastic. So good.
So Monroe gave those papers to Berkeley to make copies of, and Monroe would tell Burr that it's Berkeley's fault. Berkeley must have spread them, but he also is the one that gave them to Berkeley. So Alexander and Eliza aren't really off the mark by blaming Monroe here.
Right.
Whoever spread them, they got out, those pamphlets were published, and Hamilton's going to respond with his own little pamphlet. A 95-page pamphlet called Observations on Certain Documents, otherwise known as the Reynolds pamphlet.
I think it's cheesy that we just said that together again.
Yep. Keeping it.
Okay.
And we're going to be getting to that, but not this episode.
Right. We have a little bit of a hurricane before we get to that.
Right. So until we get to that hurricane next time on Hamilton the Podcast, remember you can get in contact with us at contact@graphocast.com, on Twitter @graphocast, or leave some comments on our actual webpage on these episode posts.
Yeah, the website is graphocast.com.
And if you want to get in touch with us on our personal Twitters, I'm at Flesh Eater.
And I'm at Alpha Knight.
We'll see you next week in the hurricane.
In the eye of the hurricane, there is quiet for just a moment.
Next week, Robbie.
Oh,
next
sorry.
week.
Oh, sorry. I got excited.
Hi, I'm Sean Hancock.
And I'm Missy Hancock.
And I'm Vinton Bayne.
Together we are the Hancock Creative Podcast.
And we have a mission to encourage your creative soul. So we ask that you would come check out our weekly podcast and weekly pep talks, specially designed to encourage you.
The Hancock Creative Podcast is part of the Graphomania Podcast Network and can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, or at graphocast.com, GRAPHOCAST.com.